You have nothing left to give, Mom. It's time to face reality. My son Andrew's words cut through me like a serrated knife as we sat in my modest kitchen on a crisp autumn morning. I felt my hands freeze around my teacup, the warmth suddenly gone from both the ceramic and my heart. He continued scrolling through his phone, not even looking up to witness the impact of his casual cruelty. His wife, Natalie, shifted uncomfortably in her seat but said nothing in my defense. Their twins, Emma and Ethan, remained absorbed in their tablets, oblivious to how their father had just dismissed their grandmother's entire existence. I sat perfectly still, my breathing shallow, as 30 years of motherhood seemed to evaporate in a single sentence. Little did Andrew know that in exactly 3 months, he would be staring at a bank statement that would change everything, and finally see the woman I had always been, hiding in plain sight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I've always been a practical woman. My husband Robert used to joke that I could stretch $1 until Washington winked. We built our lives in the small town of Maplewood, where I taught 2nd grade for 27 years, while Robert worked at the local credit union. We weren't wealthy by conventional standards, but we were content. Our modest 2-bedroom craftsman house with the pale blue shutters and wraparound porch had been our sanctuary, purchased when Andrew was just 3 years old. I still remember how he'd run through the empty rooms, his laughter echoing off walls that had yet to collect our family photographs and memories. When Robert passed away suddenly from a heart attack 8 years ago, Andrew was already established in his career as an investment banker in the city. He married Natalie, a marketing executive with perfect posture and a penchant for organic everything, shortly after. The twins came a year later, bringing a chaotic joy that I cherished during my weekly visits to their sleek downtown condo. I would arrive with homemade cookies that Natalie would discreetly replace with store-bought gluten-free options when she thought I wasn't looking. "Mom, I'm worried about you," Andrew said during that fateful breakfast. He had stopped by unexpectedly, on his way to a golf retreat, something he rarely did anymore. "The house is getting to be too much for you, the steps, the yard work, and your retirement fund isn't going to last forever with inflation. We should talk about downsizing. Maybe one of those senior living communities." "I manage just fine," I replied, pouring more coffee into his cup. "Mrs. Peterson's grandson helps with the heavier yard work, and I've been thinking about converting the den into a ground-floor bedroom eventually." Andrew sighed, the sound heavy with impatience. "That's throwing good money after bad. This house is from another era, your era. It's time to be practical." Natalie nodded in agreement. "The twins need more of your attention now that they're starting middle school. It would be so much easier if you lived somewhere that required less maintenance." What they really meant was, "We need you available as a babysitter, but we don't want to worry about you." The irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted me simultaneously, more present and less burdensome. "I've been managing my affairs since before you were born, Andrew," I said quietly. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready to make any major changes yet." That's when he looked up from his phone, his expression a mixture of condescension and frustration. "You have nothing left to give, Mom. It's time to face reality. Your pension barely covers your expenses. The house is falling apart. And frankly, we're concerned about your judgment lately." "My judgment?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Natalie saw you at the bank last month, withdrawing a large sum of cash. That's not safe, Mom. People your age are targets for scams." I felt heat rise to my face. The withdrawal had been for a specific purpose, one I had no intention of sharing with them. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own money, Andrew." "Are you?" he challenged, "because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're one major home repair away from financial disaster. And then what? You'll expect us to bail you out?" The words stung not just because of their harshness, but because of how thoroughly Andrew had misunderstood my situation, and me. For years, I had lived frugally, saved diligently, and managed my finances with a precision that would have impressed his Wall Street colleagues. But he never asked. He assumed that because I lived simply, I had simple means. After Robert died, I discovered something that changed everything. Behind his quiet demeanor and steady credit union job, my husband had been an astute investor. Nothing flashy or risky, just consistent, disciplined saving in blue-chip stocks and index funds over decades. He had never mentioned the extent of his investments, perhaps waiting for the right moment, a moment that never came. The life insurance policy was substantial, yes, but it was the investment portfolio that left me breathless when the financial advisor explained its value. Robert had left me not just comfortable, but wealthy. Yet something in me hesitated to share this information, even with Andrew. Perhaps it was the grief still fresh in my heart, or perhaps it was a lifetime of valuing privacy and independence. Whatever the reason, I decided to continue living as I always had, making only a few quiet improvements to the house and setting up a separate account for the bulk of the inheritance. As the years passed, I found quiet satisfaction in growing Robert's legacy. I educated myself about investing, joined an online investment group for women over 60, and made thoughtful decisions that steadily increased the portfolio. All while Andrew assumed I was living on my teacher's pension and Social Security. Now, sitting across from my son as he delivered his verdict on my worth, I wondered what Robert would advise. He had always been the diplomatic one, smoothing over difficult conversations with patience and humor. But Robert wasn't here, and I had learned to stand on my own. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I think it's time for you to go," I said, rising from the table. My voice was steady, betraying none of the hurt churning inside me. "I have a garden club meeting this afternoon." Andrew looked surprised. Usually our conversations ended when he decided they were over. "Mom, we're just trying to help. Think about what I said." I nodded, not in agreement but in dismissal. "I'll walk you out." After they left, I stood on the porch watching their luxury SUV pull away. The twins hadn't even looked up from their screens to say goodbye. I wondered when my grandchildren had stopped seeing me as a person and started viewing me as just an extension of their parents' obligations, a problem to be managed. Back inside, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the morning light filtering through curtains I had sewn myself decades ago. The house felt different now, as if Andrew's words had somehow altered its dimensions. It wasn't just my home anymore. It was a contested space, a symbol of what my son believed to be my inability to face reality. I pulled out my tablet, the one Andrew had given me last Christmas with the comment, "This is easier for seniors to use," and logged into my investment account. The numbers that greeted me were reassuring. Over $2 million, carefully diversified across stocks, bonds, and real estate investment trusts, a nest egg that had grown steadily under my cautious but knowledgeable management. Why had I kept this secret, even as Andrew's attitude toward me grew increasingly dismissive? The question lingered as I moved through my day, watering the herbs, on the windowsill, folding laundry, preparing a simple lunch for one. Perhaps it was pride, or perhaps it was something deeper, a need to be valued for who I was, rather than what I possessed. Over the next few weeks, Andrew's words echoed in my thoughts. "You have nothing left to give." The phrase followed me as I volunteered at the local library, as I taught art at the community center, as I tended to my garden that produced enough vegetables to share with 3 neighboring families. Each act felt like a quiet rebellion against his assessment of my worth. The first time I noticed the pattern of dismissal was 2 years after Robert's death. I had knitted a blanket for the twins' 3rd birthday, soft merino wool in their favorite colors, with their names embroidered in the corners. Hours of work, each stitch made with love and care. When they opened the gift, Natalie had smiled tightly and said, "Oh, how old-fashioned. That's sweet, Eleanor." The blankets were promptly placed at the bottom of the gift pile and never mentioned again. Later, I saw them being used as drop cloths when the children painted at their little easels. Paint splattered and forgotten, just like my efforts. Then came the Thanksgiving when they decided not to include me in their plans. "We're doing a Friendsgiving this year," Andrew explained over the phone. "Just couples our age, you know. It would be awkward to have." Well, you understand. I did understand. I understood that I had become an inconvenience, a reminder of aging and mortality in their youth-obsessed world. I prepared a small turkey breast for myself that Thanksgiving and ate alone at my dining room table, using the good china and lighting a candle. I refused to diminish the holiday just because my presence had been diminished in their eyes. The exclusions continued, small at first and then increasingly obvious. My offers to babysit were accepted only in emergencies. My advice was politely deflected. My stories about Andrew's childhood were met with eye rolls and quick changes of subject. I was becoming a footnote in my own family's story. One particularly painful incident occurred at Emma's school recital. I had arrived early to secure good seats, saving spots for Andrew and Natalie. When they arrived, surrounded by friends from their social circle, Andrew hesitated before acknowledging me. "Oh, Mom, you're here already," he said, sounding surprised, despite our arrangement. "We actually promised the Hendersons we'd sit with them. There's a group of us going out after. You understand, right?" I did understand. I understood perfectly as I watched them settle several rows away, laughing with their friends while I sat alone clutching the bouquet of flowers I had brought for Emma. After the performance, I waited patiently to give her the flowers, but they whisked the children away for ice cream before I could reach them. The bouquet wilted in my car during the drive home. These moments accumulated like small stones in my pocket, weighing me down with each passing month. Yet I continued to show up, to try, to offer what I could of myself, even as the spaces where I was welcome grew increasingly narrow. The most revealing incident came during a Sunday dinner at their condo. Natalie had invited her parents, sleek, cosmopolitan people who spoke casually about their travels to exotic locations and their second home in Sedona. I sat quietly, listening to the conversation flow around me, occasionally offering a comment. That seemed to drop into a sudden, awkward silence before the discussion continued, as if I hadn't spoken. During dessert, the topic turned to finances and retirement. Natalie's father, Martin, was explaining his latest investment strategy with obvious pride. "The key is diversification," he announced. "Too many people our age get conservative and miss opportunities?" I nodded in agreement. "That's true. I've found that a mix of growth stocks and dividend-paying investments provides a good balance." The table fell silent. Then Andrew laughed. A short, uncomfortable sound. "Mom's been reading those finance magazines at the doctor's office again," he said, patting my hand as if I were a child repeating a phrase without understanding its meaning. "Actually," I began, "I've been following the market quite closely since—" "Mom loves those little stock market segments on the news," Andrew interrupted. "Anyway, Martin, you were saying about your advisor's recommendations?" I fell silent, understanding my role in this tableau. I was to be the slightly confused elderly mother, not the financially literate woman who had grown her portfolio by an average of 7% annually for the past 8 years. It was easier for Andrew to believe in this caricature than to see me clearly. After dinner, as I was helping clear the dishes despite Natalie's insistence that I shouldn't bother, I overheard Andrew in the hallway speaking to Martin. "We're trying to convince her to downsize," he was saying. "The house is too much, but you know how they get at that age. Stubborn, refusing to admit they need help." "Tough situation," Martin replied. "We had to take away my mother's checkbook. Eventually, sometimes you have to be the parent to your parent." I stood frozen in the kitchen, plates in hand, as my son, the boy I had taught to balance a checkbook, the young man whose first apartment security deposit I had covered, the adult whose down payment I had quietly supplemented from my savings, discussed me as if I were an incompetent child. That night, driving home alone, I made a decision. I would not confront Andrew about his misconceptions. I would not parade my financial statements before him to prove my competence. Instead, I would continue to live by my own lights, managing my affairs with the same quiet efficiency I always had. If he chose not to see me clearly, that was his limitation, not mine. But something had shifted inside me. A resignation, perhaps, or maybe a liberation. I stopped calling quite so often. I declined invitations that felt obligatory rather than genuine. I began to build a life that didn't revolve around fitting into the narrow space they had allotted. For me, I joined a watercolor class at the community college. I started a book club with 4 other women my age, all of us grandmothers with varying degrees of family connection. I volunteered more hours at the library and the local food bank. I planted a larger vegetable garden and learned how to can and preserve. My days filled with purpose and connection that had nothing to do with my identity as Andrew's mother or the twins' grandmother. Yet the hurt remained, a quiet ache beneath these new activities. Not because I needed Andrew's approval, but because I mourned the relationship we might have had, one built on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's lives. 3 months after that painful breakfast conversation, the situation came to a head in a way I could never have anticipated. Andrew called on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "Mom, we need to talk. Can I come over tomorrow morning?" "Is everything all right?" I asked, immediately concerned about the twins. "I need to discuss something with you in person." He arrived the next day alone, which was unusual. Typically, he brought Natalie as a buffer, or the twins as a distraction. He looked uncomfortable as he sat at my kitchen table, declining coffee or tea. "Mom," he began, then stopped, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my heart contracted. "I received something in the mail yesterday, something concerning you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. I recognized it immediately, a quarterly statement from one of my investment accounts. But why would it have gone to Andrew? "This came to my office," he explained, watching me carefully. "Apparently, there was a mix-up with addresses after you updated your contact information." I opened the envelope, though I already knew what it contained. The statement showed the current balance, just over $2 million, along with the quarterly performance metrics and distribution details. "Is this some kind of mistake?" Andrew asked, his voice strained. "This says it's your account." I looked up from the paper, meeting his eyes directly. "It is my account." "But how? This is over $1 million, Mom." "One of several accounts, actually," I said calmly, folding the statement and returning it to the envelope. Andrew stared at me, incomprehension written across his features. "Several accounts? What are you talking about? Where did this money come from?" "Your father was a very careful investor," I explained, "and after he died, I continued what he started. I've been managing these investments for 8 years now." "But why didn't you tell me?" His voice held accusation now, as if I had deliberately deceived him. "Would it have changed how you see me?" I asked quietly. The question hung between us, uncomfortable in its directness. Andrew looked away, then back, his expression conflicted. "Of course it would have," he finally said. "We've been worried about you struggling financially. We thought you needed our help." "And that's the only reason you should respect me?" I asked. "Because I have money, not because I raised you, or because I have my own thoughts and interests, or simply because I'm a person with inherent worth. Andrew flushed. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? You have nothing left to give, you said to me, right here at this table, as if my value was measured only by what I could provide to you. His flush deepened. I was talking about the house, about your retirement fund. No, I interrupted gently. You were talking about me, about who I am to you now, an obligation, a problem to solve, not a person with agency and capabilities. Andrew fell silent, staring at the tabletop. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued. I didn't realize how it sounded. I know, I said. That's part of the problem. We sat in silence for several minutes, the ticking of the kitchen clock marking time between us. Outside, a cardinal landed on the bird feeder I had filled that morning, its bright red plumage a flash of color against the green backdrop of the yard. So what now? Andrew finally asked. Are you going to sell the house after all? Move somewhere? Fancier? I smiled slightly. No. I love this house. It's exactly where I want to be. The money isn't for living differently. It's for living securely, on my own terms. But surely you want to enjoy it? Travel? Buy things? I do enjoy it. I funded the new children's room at the library last year. I anonymously pay college. Tuition for 2 students at the community college each semester. I'm planning a trip to the Galapagos Islands with my book club next spring. I paused. Wealth isn't just about acquisition, Andrew. It's about choice and impact. He looked at me then, really looked, perhaps seeing for the first time in years the woman I had become, rather than the fading snapshot of motherhood he had filed away in his mind. I'm sorry, he said finally. I've been dismissive. Yes, I agreed. You have. I didn't mean to be. I just wanted to help. I know. But help has to start with respect, with seeing the person as they are, not as you assume them to be. Andrew left my house that day with a thoughtful expression I hadn't seen on his face in years. The revelation of my financial situation had cracked open something between us, but I wasn't naive enough to believe that a single conversation could repair years of dismissal and misunderstanding. As I watched his car pull away, I felt neither triumph nor vindication, just a quiet hope that perhaps we had taken the first step toward seeing each other clearly again. In the days that followed, I continued my routine as usual, tending my garden in the cool morning hours, volunteering at the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays, meeting my book club for coffee and passionate discussions about literature both classic and contemporary. My life had developed its own rhythm, independent of Andrew's approval or attention, and I found comfort in that autonomy. A week after our conversation, Andrew called. His voice sounded different, less confident, more hesitant. Mom, I've been thinking about our talk, he began. I realize I've made a lot of assumptions about you. I'd like to, well, get to know who you are now, if that's okay. I smiled into the phone, grateful for the effort, even as I recognized how sad it was that my own son felt he needed permission to know me. I'd like that, Andrew. Maybe we could have lunch, just the 2 of us, he suggested. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown the following Saturday. As I hung up the phone, I tried to temper my expectations. One lunch wouldn't erase the pattern of our relationship, but it was a beginning. The cafe was bustling when I arrived, filled with the weekend crowd of young professionals and families enjoying brunch. Andrew was already seated at a corner table, looking slightly out of place in his casual clothes rather than his usual business attire. He stood as I approached, an old-fashioned courtesy I hadn't seen from him in years. You look nice, Mom, he said, and seemed to mean it. We ordered avocado toast for him, a croque madame for me, and fell into an awkward silence that stretched between us like a physical presence. How strange, I thought, to feel like strangers with someone whose diapers I had changed, whose nightmares I had soothed, whose life I had shaped from its very beginning. "So," Andrew finally said, stirring his coffee needlessly, "tell me about your investment strategies." I laughed, surprising both of us with the sound. "Really, Andrew? That's your opening question?" He flushed. "I'm trying here, Mom. I don't know where to start. How about asking me what book I'm reading? Or what I'm growing in my garden this year? Or literally anything about who I am rather than what I own?" His embarrassment deepened, but a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough. What are you reading these days?" And just like that, we began to talk, really talk, for the first time in years. I told him about the book club's current selection, a debut novel by a Nigerian author that had sparked heated debate among our members. He seemed genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions about the themes and characters. "You always loved reading," he said at one point, a note of remembrance in his voice. "You used to read to me every night, even when I was old enough to read myself." "You always begged for one more chapter," I recalled, smiling at the memory. "And you always gave in," he added. "Not always," I corrected gently. Part of parenting is knowing when to say no, even when it would be easier to say yes. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition perhaps of his own parenting challenges with the twins. "They're not easy at this age," he admitted. "Emma, especially. She's so determined." "Like her father was," I said. "You once spent 3 days building a fort in the backyard because I suggested it might be too difficult for you." He laughed. "I don't remember that." "There's a lot you don't remember," I said, not unkindly. "That's natural, but I do. I remember everything." Our food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. As we ate, I observed my son, the fine lines beginning to appear around his eyes, the slight thinning of his hair at the temples, the way his hands, now so much larger than mine, still held his fork the same way he had as a child. When had he become so firmly middle-aged? When had I stopped seeing the changes in him, just as he had stopped seeing the capabilities in me? "Mom," he said after a while, setting down his fork. "Can I ask you something? About the money?" I nodded cautiously. "Why did you keep it a secret, even from me?" It was a fair question, one I had asked myself many times over the years. I considered my answer carefully. At first it was grief, I explained. After your father died, I was in shock. The money seemed secondary, almost disrespectful to focus on when I'd just lost him. Then, as time passed, I realized I enjoyed the privacy of it, the independence. For the first time in my life, I was making financial decisions completely on my own. But even after that, when things became more distant between us, I met his gaze directly. By then, it had become clear that you had a certain image of me, a sweet, somewhat helpless older woman who needed guidance and protection. Correcting. That image would have meant confronting you with how wrong you were, how little you actually saw me. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Andrew winced. I deserved that. "It's not about deserving," I said. "It's about seeing. Really seeing someone requires effort and interest. At some point, you stopped being interested in who I was beyond your mother." "And Natalie?" he asked. "Does she know?" "No, though she might have if she'd ever asked me anything about myself beyond whether I needed help carrying groceries." The honesty between us felt both refreshing and precarious, like walking on newly frozen ice. I worried that too much weight, too much truth at once might cause it to crack beneath us. But Andrew surprised me. Instead of becoming defensive, he nodded slowly. "She doesn't know her own parents very well either," he admitted. "I never really thought about it before, but we both treat family as, I don't know, background characters in our lives. People who fulfill certain roles but don't really have their own stories. Everyone has their own story, I said quietly. Even parents, even grandparents. I'd like to hear more of yours, he said, and for the first time in years, I believed him. We talked for nearly 3 hours that day, our cold coffee cups and empty plates long since cleared away. I told him about my watercolor class, about the community garden project I'd helped establish, about my friendship with Mrs. Abernathy, next door, who was teaching me to play chess at 83 years old. He shared his frustrations at work, his concerns about Emma's struggle with math, his own sense of time passing too quickly. It wasn't a perfect conversation. There were awkward pauses and moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But it was honest, and that felt like a gift. As we prepared to leave, Andrew hesitated. Would it be okay if I brought the twins by tomorrow? Not Natalie, she has a work thing. Just me and the kids. Maybe you could show them your garden. I'd like that, I said, surprised and pleased by the suggestion. He nodded, then added, And Mom, I am sorry. For what I said that day, and for a lot of things before that, too. I know, I replied, reaching out to squeeze his hand briefly. Awareness is the beginning of change. The next day, Andrew arrived with Emma and Ethan in tow. The children seemed initially reluctant, clearly viewing the visit as an obligation rather than a pleasure. They stood awkwardly in my living room, their devices noticeably absent. Andrew's doing, I suspected. Grandma has a really cool garden, Andrew told them with forced enthusiasm. She grows vegetables and flowers. Emma rolled her eyes. We have a grocery store, Dad. I laughed, surprising them. Yes, you do, and so do I. But there's something special about eating a tomato you've watched grow from a tiny seed. Would you like to pick some cherry tomatoes? They're like nature's candy. Ethan, always the more agreeable of the two, shrugged. I guess. I led them to the backyard, where my garden stretched across the sunny southern exposure. August had brought an abundance of produce, tomatoes heavy on the vine, zucchini threatening to take over their allotted space, peppers in a rainbow of colors from green to deep purple, herbs sending their fragrance into the warm air. Whoa, Ethan said, his eyes widening. You grew all this? With some help from the sun and rain, I replied. Here, try one. I plucked a ripe cherry tomato and offered it to him. He popped it into his mouth, his expression changing from skepticism to surprise. It's sweet. Can I try? Emma asked, her studied indifference cracking slightly. Soon, both children were moving through the garden with small baskets I had provided, harvesting tomatoes, inspecting peppers, asking questions about each plant. Andrew stood back, watching with a bemused expression. I didn't know you had all this, he said quietly when the twins were absorbed in discovering a praying mantis on the tomato trellis. There's a lot you didn't know, I replied without rancor. But that can change. As the afternoon progressed, I showed the twins how to tell when a zucchini was perfectly ripe, how to pinch basil leaves to promote fuller growth, how to identify beneficial insects like ladybugs and earthworms. Their initial reluctance gave way to genuine curiosity. Can we make something with these? Emma asked, holding up her basket of harvested vegetables. What would you like to make? I asked. She considered this seriously. Something Italian. Like in that cook. I smiled at his unexpected culinary knowledge. Perfect. Let's wash up and head to the kitchen. What followed was a joyful chaos of chopping, sautéing, and seasoning. I taught the twins how to handle a knife safely, how to layer the vegetables, for the most beautiful presentation, how to know when the dish was perfectly done. Andrew helped, following my instructions with a concentration that reminded me of when he was a boy learning to bake cookies at my side. As we sat down to enjoy our creation, accompanied by crusty bread and a simple salad, I observed the transformation in all three of them. The twins were animated, proud of their contribution to the meal. Andrew seemed more relaxed than I had seen him in years. The constant tension in his shoulders noticeably diminished. "This is really good," Ethan declared, taking a second helping. "It tastes better because we made it," Emma added wisely. "And because we knew exactly where everything came from," I said. "From seed to table." "Could we do this again?" Emma asked, looking at me directly. "Like, learn to grow stuff?" Her question caught me by surprise. "I'd love that," I said, trying to keep the emotion from my voice. "Maybe you could each have your own small garden plot next spring." "For real?" Ethan's excitement was palpable. "For real," I confirmed. "We could start planning this winter, deciding what you'd like to grow." "Cool," both twins said in unison. After dinner, as Andrew prepared to take the children home, Emma hesitated by the door. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Are you rich? Dad said you have like millions of dollars." Andrew looked mortified. "Emma, that's not—" I held up a hand to stop him. "It's okay," I told him before turning back to Emma. "I am comfortable financially, yes, but richness isn't just about money." She frowned, considering this. "What else is it about?" "It's about having enough of what truly matters, not just money, but time, purpose, connection, joy." I smiled at her. Today, making ratatouille with you and Ethan, I felt very rich indeed. She nodded, seeming to understand on some level. "So you don't live in a mansion because you don't want to?" "Exactly. I live here because I love this house, this garden, this neighborhood. Having money gives me choices, but the most important choice is how to live authentically, true to what matters to me." Emma considered this seriously. "That's pretty cool, Grandma." After they left, I sat on my porch swing in the gathering, processing the unexpected turn the weekend had taken. 2 days ago, I had been a woman dismissed by her family, living a life they neither understood nor valued. Now, something had shifted, not dramatically, not completely, but significantly. A door had opened, allowing for the possibility of a new kind of relationship based on genuine seeing, rather than comfortable assumptions. The following week brought another surprise. A letter arrived from Natalie, an actual handwritten letter, on heavy stationery, not a text or email. I opened it with curiosity that turned to astonishment as I read, "Dear Eleanor, Andrew has told me about your conversation and the revelation of your financial situation. I realize now how we've both failed to see you clearly, making assumptions based on stereotypes rather than taking the time to know who you truly are. I'm deeply sorry for my part in this. The way I've spoken about you, sometimes even in your presence, reflects poorly on me, not you. I've been so focused on my own life, my own definitions of success and value, that I've dismissed wisdom and worth that didn't fit my narrow perspective. The twins haven't stopped talking about their day with you, the garden, the cooking lesson. I can't remember the last time I saw them so engaged with something that didn't involve a screen. Emma has already asked when they can visit again. If you're open to it, I'd like to start fresh, not as people with prescribed roles of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but as two women with their own stories, strengths, and experiences to share. With respect and hope, Natalie, I read the letter twice, then a third time, noting the careful penmanship, the thoughtful phrasing, the absence of defensiveness. It wasn't the revelation of my wealth that moved me. It was the recognition of my personhood that brought tears to my eyes. I called her that evening. "Thank you for your letter," I said when she answered. "I meant every word," she replied, her typically confident voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've been doing a lot of thinking this week." About? About how quickly I put people in boxes. My parents, you, even Andrew sometimes. I decide who someone is and what they're capable of, and then I stop looking for evidence to the contrary. Her self-awareness surprised me. That's a profound realization. It's also a terrible way to go through life, she admitted. Missing the complexity in people because it's easier to deal with the simplified version I've created. We talked for nearly an hour, having the kind of honest conversation I had never imagined possible between us. She shared her insecurities about parenting, her frustrations with her own mother's emotional distance, her fear that she was recreating the same patterns with Emma. I never knew any of this, I said at one point. You never asked, she pointed out, then immediately backtracked. No, that's not fair. I never made myself askable. I presented this perfect facade and kept everyone, including you, at arm's length. Well, I said, perhaps we can both work on that. Our conversation ended with a tentative plan for her to join me for tea the following week, just the two of us. No Andrew or the twins as buffers. I'd like that, she said, and I believed her. As I hung up the phone, I marveled at how quickly everything had changed. One financial statement accidentally delivered to the wrong address had catalyzed a complete reordering of my family relationships. But no, that wasn't quite right. The change had begun long before that, with my decision to live authentically, to build a life of meaning independent of their validation, to value myself even when they did not. The bank statement had simply made visible what had been true all along, that I was not the diminished, dependent woman they had assumed me to be. I was Eleanor Matthews, master gardener, community volunteer, watercolor artist, investor, grandmother, and still evolving human being with my own unique worth. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my day planner open before me. I had been considering a trip to the Galapagos Islands with my book club for months, but had hesitated to commit, always finding reasons to postpone making concrete plans. Now, with decisive strokes of my pen, I marked the dates in May when we would travel. It was time to embrace the adventures I had been deferring, to live not just for others, but for myself as well. As I sipped my coffee, watching the first light illuminate my garden, I thought about how often we imprison ourselves in other people's perceptions, how easily we come to believe that their limited view of us represents the whole truth, how frequently we shrink ourselves to fit the boxes they've constructed, even when those boxes crush our spirits and diminish our joy. Breaking free of those constraints doesn't require wealth or dramatic gestures. It requires only the quiet courage to live according to our own values, to nurture our own gardens, literal and figurative, and to remain open to connection while being unwavering in our self-respect. Andrew's words, "You have nothing left to give," no longer held any power over me. They had been proven false not just by my financial statement, but by the abundance of my life, the vegetables flourishing in my garden, the relationships I had cultivated in my community, the knowledge and skills I continued to develop, the love I was still capable of offering when it was received with respect. I had everything left to give, but now I understood more clearly than ever before that my giving needed to flow from choice rather than obligation, from genuine connection rather than desperate validation seeking, from wholeness rather than depletion. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across my kitchen floor, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not because everything was suddenly perfect with Andrew and Natalie, not because one weekend of connection with the twins erased years of distance, but because I had finally and fully embraced my own worth, independent of their recognition. Whatever happened next, I would face it as my complete self, not just as a mother or grandmother, but as Eleanor, complex, capable, and continuing to grow, like the garden outside my window that offered its abundance to anyone willing to see its beauty and value its gifts. The autumn leaves had begun their transformation, painting my neighborhood in brilliant hues of amber, crimson, and gold by the time Natalie arrived for our scheduled tea. She appeared on my doorstep precisely at 2:00, holding a small gift bag and looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I brought something," she said, offering the bag as she stepped inside. "It's not much, just to thank you for giving me another chance. Inside the bag was a beautiful leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover. I thought you might like to write about your garden, she explained, or your travels. Emma mentioned you're planning a trip to the Galapagos Islands? Yes, with my book club, I confirmed, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Thank you, Natalie. This is perfect. We settled in the sunroom at the back of the house, where I had prepared a proper afternoon tea, delicate cucumber sandwiches, scones with clotted cream and jam, and an assortment of petit fours from the French bakery downtown. The fine china that usually sat behind glass doors in my dining room cabinet now graced the table, along with silver serving pieces that had been wedding gifts nearly 40 years ago. Natalie looked around with appreciation. This is lovely, Eleanor. I had no idea you did things like this. There's a lot we don't know about each other, I replied, pouring the tea into cups thin enough to be translucent in the afternoon light. That's what today is for, isn't it? Our conversation began tentatively, with cautious inquiries about safe topics, the twins' school activities, the book my club was currently reading, the unseasonably warm weather. But as the tea disappeared and the plate of sandwiches emptied, something shifted. The polite veneer gave way to more authentic exchange. Can I ask you something? Natalie said, setting down her cup. Something I've been wondering since Andrew told me about your financial situation? I nodded, bracing myself slightly. Were you ever tempted to tell us? To, I don't know, prove us wrong when we were being dismissive? The question was surprisingly perceptive. Often, I admitted. Especially after particularly condescending comments or when you and Andrew would discuss my finances as if I weren't in the room. But it never felt right to use money as a weapon, even in self-defense. I would have, she said with a small laugh. I'd have pulled out those statements and watched our jaws drop. That's the difference between 35 and 70, I said, smiling to soften the observation. At my age, you learn that vindication is rarely as satisfying as it seems in anticipation. She considered this, twisting her wedding band thoughtfully. I think I've spent most of my adult life trying to prove something, to my parents, to my colleagues, even to Andrew sometimes. It's exhausting. It is, I agreed, and ultimately futile. People will see what they're prepared to see. Like how we saw you. Like how you saw me, I confirmed gently. Natalie looked genuinely regretful. I made so many assumptions. That you were financially naive because you were from a different generation. That you were technologically incompetent because you were older. That you needed our guidance because you were alone. Those aren't unusual assumptions, I said. Our culture tends to render older women invisible, or at best reduces them to stereotypes, the sweet, slightly dotty grandmother or the bitter, interfering mother-in-law. Which category did I put you in? She asked, wincing slightly. Bit of both, I think. Harmless but irrelevant, until I expressed an opinion you didn't agree with. Then suddenly, I was outdated and out of touch. She didn't deny it. I'm sorry, Eleanor, truly. I believe you, I said, and meant it. But Natalie, this isn't just about me. It's about how you see everyone in your life, including yourself. If you view people primarily as roles rather than as complex individuals, you miss so much richness and opportunity for connection. Our conversation continued past tea and into early evening. We spoke about her career ambitions, my experience as a woman navigating the workforce in a different era, her sometimes strained relationship with her own mother, my hopes for continued independence as I aged. For the first time, we talked as two women with their own histories and perspectives, not just as relatives connected through Andrew. As she prepared to leave, Natalie paused at the door. I'd like to do this again, she said. Maybe monthly, just the two of us? I'd like that very much, I replied, surprised and pleased by the suggestion. She hesitated, then added, And, Eleanor, I was wondering if you might consider joining us for Thanksgiving this year. Not at our place. We'd come here. The twins were fascinated by your cooking, and I thought perhaps we could prepare the meal together. The invitation represented such a shift from previous years when I had been an afterthought or excluded entirely that I found myself momentarily speechless. That would be wonderful, I finally managed. After she left, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that mirrored the autumn leaves. A sense of cautious optimism filled me. Not naive excitement that everything was magically repaired, but a measured hope that genuine change was possible. The next few weeks brought a gradual but noticeable transformation in my relationship with my family. Andrew began calling regularly, not out of obligation, but with real questions about my life and experiences. The twins visited every Saturday morning to tend the small garden plots I had helped them establish at the edge of my vegetable garden. Ethan's dedicated to culinary herbs, Emma's to flowers for cutting. One Saturday in late October, as Emma carefully harvested the last of her zinnias and sunflowers, she asked a question that took me by surprise. "Grandma, were you always good with money? Or did you learn it?" I set down my pruning shears, giving her question the consideration it deserved. "I learned it, mostly through necessity. When I was young, money was tight. Your great-grandparents struggled during the recession of the 1970s, and I watched how stress over finances affected our family. I promised myself I'd develop better habits." Emma nodded thoughtfully, arranging her flowers in the basket I'd provided. "Dad says you're, really smart about investing and stuff." "I've educated myself over the years," I said. "Anyone can learn financial literacy with some effort." "Could you teach me?" she asked, her expression serious. "Dad says I should start thinking about these things, but he always makes it sound super complicated." I felt a surge of joy at her request. "I'd be happy to teach you, Emma. It's never too early to understand how money works." That afternoon, while Ethan helped Andrew rake leaves in the front yard, Emma and I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and a pot of hot chocolate. I explained the basics of compound interest, the difference between saving and investing, the importance of diversification. She listened with surprising concentration, asking thoughtful questions that revealed a natural aptitude for financial concepts. "So, your money makes more money while you sleep?" she clarified, eyes wide with the revelation. "Exactly," I confirmed. "That's the power of investing wisely." "That's actually pretty cool," she decided. "Way better than just buying stuff." I smiled, recognizing the spark of understanding I'd first experienced decades ago. "What would you do if you had money working for you?" I asked. She considered the question seriously. "I'd help endangered animals, and maybe start my own business. Someday, like a flower farm or something." "Those are wonderful goals," I told her. "Next time you visit, we can talk about how to start a small investment account to work toward them." When Andrew and Ethan came in from raking, flushed with exertion and laughing about something between them, Emma proudly announced, "Grandma's teaching me about compound interest. Did you know money can double itself if you wait long enough?" Andrew looked at me with surprise and gratitude. That's more enthusiasm than I've ever managed to generate for financial education. "Sometimes we hear things differently from someone who isn't our parent," I said. "I remember how you used to tune me out when I tried to teach you about budgeting." "And now, I wish I'd listened sooner," he admitted. As October gave way to November, preparations for Thanksgiving began in earnest. Natalie and I exchanged frequent calls, planning the menu and coordinating cooking duties. The twins were enthusiastic participants, each lobbying for their favorite dishes. Even Andrew contributed ideas, suggesting we incorporate some of his father's recipes to honor family traditions. 3 days before Thanksgiving, I received an unexpected call from my investment advisor, Michael. "Eleanor, I wanted to give you a heads up. There's been some unusual activity in the account you set up for community grants. Someone's been making inquiries, not accessing anything, just asking questions. My stomach tightened. What kind of inquiries? About the structure of the fund, the distribution schedule, the amount allocated. All things that aren't public information. The person claimed to be your son, Andrew Matthews. I exhaled slowly, relieved it wasn't identity theft, but concerned about Andrew's motivations. Thank you for letting me know, Michael. I'll handle it. That evening, I called Andrew directly. Is there something you wanted to know about my charitable foundation? I asked without preamble. There was a pause on the other end of the line. How did you? Michael called me. You know, my investment advisor whose job is to protect my financial privacy. I'm sorry, Andrew said quickly. I should have asked you directly. I was just curious. About what? Specifically? He hesitated. About how you structured it, the foundation, the grants you give. I've been thinking a lot about legacy, about impact beyond just accumulating wealth. The earnestness in his voice softened my irritation. Why don't you come over tomorrow evening? We can discuss it properly. The next night, Andrew arrived with a notebook and pen, looking more like an eager student than the confident financial expert he presented to the world. We sat at my dining room table, where I had prepared a simple portfolio outlining my philanthropic strategies. I established the Eleanor Matthews Community Foundation 5 years ago, I explained, showing him the structure. It's modest compared to major foundations, but it allows me to support causes I care about in a systematic way. Andrew studied the documents with genuine interest. This is impressive, Mom. You've created a sustainable model that will continue generating funds for grants even after. He trailed off. After I'm gone, I finished for him. Yes, that was the intention, to create something lasting. And these grants, he continued, reviewing the list of recipients. They're so diverse. The Community Garden Program, scholarships for women returning to education, the Children's Literacy Initiative. How did you choose them? I considered where I could make the most meaningful difference with limited resources, I explained. Big national charities have many donors. I wanted to focus on local needs that might otherwise go unaddressed. Andrew nodded, continuing to make notes. And this educational component, requiring financial literacy training for scholarship. Recipients, that's brilliant. It seemed important to break the cycle, I said. Many women struggle financially not because they're incapable of managing money, but because they've never been taught how. We spent over 2 hours discussing the foundation, with Andrew asking increasingly thoughtful questions about impact measurement, sustainability, and community involvement. As the evening drew to a close, he finally revealed his true purpose. Mom, I've been thinking about starting something similar. On a smaller scale, of course. But after seeing what you've built, how you've leveraged your resources for meaningful change, it's inspired me. His words filled me with unexpected emotion. Of all the ways Andrew could have responded to the revelation of my financial acumen, choosing to learn from it, to be inspired by it, was perhaps the most healing. I'd be happy to help you establish something, I told him. Though I suspect you have access to more sophisticated advisors than I do. Maybe, he acknowledged, but they don't have your perspective, your values. That's what I want to learn from. As he prepared to leave, Andrew paused at the door. I've spent most of my career focused on accumulating wealth, he said quietly. I never really thought about what wealth is for. You've shown me it can be a tool for meaningful impact, not just security or status. It's never too late to redefine your relationship with money, I told him, or with anything else that matters. He nodded, seeming to understand that I was talking about more than financial philosophy. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and crisp, the sky a brilliant blue against the few remaining autumn leaves. I rose early, savoring the quiet morning hours before my kitchen would fill with family and activity. As I sipped my coffee on the porch, wrapped in a warm shawl against the November chill, I reflected on the extraordinary changes of the past few months. Since the accidental revelation of my financial status, something fundamental had shifted in how my family perceived me, and more importantly, in how they related to me. The dismissal and condescension had given way to genuine interest and respect. The assumption of incompetence had been replaced by recognition of my capabilities and wisdom. But it wasn't really about the money, I realized. The money had simply been the catalyst that forced them to see me clearly, perhaps for the first time in years. What had really changed was their willingness to look beyond their preconceptions and my willingness to stand firmly in my truth, rather than contorting myself to fit their expectations. By mid-morning, my quiet house had transformed into a bustling center of activity. Natalie and Emma worked together preparing the sweet potato casserole, their hands sticky with marshmallows and brown sugar. Ethan helped Andrew set the dining room table with my best china and silver, carefully following the diagram I had sketched for proper placement of the various utensils. The air filled with the aroma of roasting turkey, simmering cranberry sauce, and bread baking in the oven. "Grandma, is this right?" Ethan called from the dining room, holding up a carefully folded napkin. "Perfect," I assured him, coming to admire his work. All 8 napkins were folded into precise fan shapes, just as I had shown him earlier. "Dad said you used to do this for all the holidays when he was little," Ethan said. "I did," I confirmed, touched that Andrew had remembered, and shared that detail. "Your father loved setting the table. He was always very particular about everything being just so." Ethan grinned. "He still is. You should see him organizing the garage. Everything has a label." "Some things never change," I said, ruffling his hair affectionately. In the kitchen, Emma was deep in concentration as she crimped the edges of a pie crust under Natalie's guidance. "Grandma, did you teach Dad to make pies?" she called when she saw me. "I tried," I replied with a laugh. "But he was more interested in eating them than making them." "Well, I'm going to learn properly," Emma declared. "Maybe I can teach him." "I'd like to see that," Natalie said, exchanging an amused glance with me over Emma's head. As we worked together, the conversation flowed easily between generations, stories from my past, anecdotes about the twins' school adventures, Natalie's recent promotion at work, Andrew's new interest in community investment. For the first time in years, I felt fully present in my family's life, not as a peripheral figure, but as an essential thread in the fabric of our shared experience. When we finally gathered around the table, the abundance before us represented more than just a traditional feast. It symbolized the renewed connections we had forged, the bridge we had built across the chasm of misunderstanding and dismissal that had separated us for too long. Andrew, to my surprise, asked if he could say grace, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. We joined hands around the table as he spoke. "We give thanks today not just for this food, but for second chances," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "For the opportunity to see each other clearly, to learn from our mistakes, to grow together rather than apart. And especially, for you, Mom, who never gave up on us even when we failed to see your true worth. Your generosity, not just financial, but of spirit, has taught us what real wealth looks like." As we ate, sharing dishes and conversation in equal measure, I observed the subtle ways my relationship with each family member had evolved. Andrew no longer spoke over me or simplified concepts for my benefit. Instead, he sought my perspective on everything from investments to parenting challenges. Natalie engaged me directly, asking thoughtful questions about my experiences and opinions, rather than politely redirecting the conversation as she once had. The twins included me naturally, in their stories and jokes, no longer treating me as an obligation to be tolerated, but as a person whose company they genuinely enjoyed. After dinner, as we lingered over coffee and pie, Emma made an announcement that caught everyone by surprise. "I've decided what I want to do for my community service project at school," she said. "I want to start a garden club for senior citizens, like what Grandma did for us, but for older people who might be lonely." The table fell silent for a moment. Then Andrew asked, "That's a wonderful idea, Emma. How did you come up with it?" Emma looked at me. "Grandma told me that gardening saved her after Grandpa died, that growing things reminded her that life goes on. I thought maybe other older people might need that reminder too." I felt tears prick my eyes at her words, not just because she had listened to and remembered something I had shared, but because she had transformed it into an idea for helping others. "That's a beautiful concept, Emma. Would you help me plan it?" she asked earnestly. "You know about gardens and about being old. I mean, about what older people might need." Despite her verbal stumble, I laughed with genuine delight. "I would be honored to help you." "Maybe we could use some of your foundation money?" she suggested hopefully. "Emma," Natalie admonished, "that's not appropriate to ask." "Actually," I interjected, "it's exactly the kind of intergenerational community project my foundation supports. We have a specific grant category for youth-led initiatives. Emma would need to submit a proper proposal, of course." "Really?" Emma's eyes widened. "Like a real business proposal?" "Really," I confirmed, "with a budget, timeline, goals, and evaluation metrics." She sat up straighter, suddenly looking older than her 12 years. "I can do that. I mean, I can learn how to do that." "I know you can," I told her, "and I'll help you every step of the way." As the evening drew to a close and the family prepared to leave, laden with leftovers and the pleasant fatigue that follows a day of celebration, Andrew hung back to speak with me privately. "Mom, thank you for today, for everything." "It was my pleasure," I assured him. "Having all of you here, cooking together, sharing stories, it meant the world to me." He hesitated, then continued. "I've been thinking about what you said that day when I first found out about your finances, about seeing people clearly. I realize now how rarely I've done that. With you, with Natalie sometimes, even with the twins. I've been so focused on checking boxes and solving problems that I've missed really knowing the people I love most." "Awareness is the first step toward change," I reminded him gently. "I'm trying," he said. "I want to be better at this, at seeing people for who they are, not who I expect them to be or need them to be." "That's all any of us can do," I said. "Try to be a little better today than we were yesterday." After they left, I moved through my house, straightening chairs and collecting forgotten napkins, savoring the lingering evidence of our gathering. The dining room still held the echoes of laughter and conversation. The kitchen counters bore the pleasant disarray of a meal thoroughly enjoyed. Even the slight disarrangement of the living room cushions felt like a reminder of presence rather than an annoyance to be corrected. I had spent so many holidays in recent years feeling like an afterthought in my family's life. But today, I had been at the center of our celebration, not because of the revelation of my financial status, but because that revelation had created space for them to see me anew and for me to stand more firmly in my own truth. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself filled with profound gratitude, not just for the renewed connections with my family, but for the journey that had brought me here. The years of invisibility had taught me to cultivate my own garden, to find meaning and purpose independent of others' validation. That hard-won self-sufficiency had ultimately created the foundation for more authentic relationships when the time was right. Andrew's dismissive words, "You have nothing left to give," now seemed not just wrong but absurd in light of all that had unfolded. I had always had plenty to give: knowledge, wisdom, practical skills, financial acumen, unconditional love. The difference was that now my family was finally ready to receive these gifts with the respect and appreciation they deserved. As I drifted toward sleep, I reflected that perhaps the greatest gift we can offer each other is the willingness to see beyond our assumptions, to recognize the complexity, capability, and continuing growth in every person, regardless of age or role or circumstance. In that recognition lies the possibility of genuine connection across the artificial divides we so often create. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for misunderstanding, new efforts to forge authentic connections. But tonight, I rested in the knowledge that we had taken a significant step toward truly seeing each other. And in that seeing, we had all become more fully ourselves. Winter settled over Maplewood with quiet grace, transforming my garden into a sculpture garden of dormant plants dusted with frost. The maples that gave our town its name stood stark against the pale December sky, their branches etched like calligraphy against the clouds. Inside my home, I had created a sanctuary of warmth, fires crackling in the hearth, the scent of cinnamon and cloves drifting from the kitchen, soft lamplight casting a golden glow in the early darkness of late afternoon. The holiday season approached with a new energy this year. Instead of wondering whether I would be included in my family's celebrations, I found myself at the center of planning them. Emma and Ethan had asked if we could bake cookies in my kitchen, like in the old days, though for them, this tradition was entirely new. Natalie had called to coordinate gift shopping, suggesting we make an afternoon of it together. And Andrew had asked somewhat sheepishly if I would be willing to host Christmas Eve dinner. "Your house feels more like Christmas," he explained. "Our place is too. Modern, I guess. All that glass and chrome. Fine for every day, but the holidays need somewhere warmer." I agreed readily, touched by his recognition of what I had always felt, that a home should embrace its inhabitants like a favorite sweater, comfortable and reassuring in its familiarity. As December unfolded, I found myself busier than I had been in years, but it was a purposeful busyness that filled me with energy rather than depleting it. Emma and I worked on her garden club proposal, refining her concept into a detailed plan for intergenerational gardening spaces at the community center. The twins visited regularly to help decorate the house for Christmas, hanging ornaments that prompted stories about their father's childhood and creating new traditions of their own. Natalie and I met weekly for tea, our conversations growing, increasingly honest and wide-ranging. One snowy afternoon, as Natalie and I sat in my sunroom watching fat flakes drift lazily past the windows, she broached a subject we had previously avoided. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be completely honest with me." "Of course," I replied, noting the serious tone in her voice. Before everything changed, when we were treating you so dismissively, did you ever think about just cutting ties with us? Walking away completely?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. I considered my answer carefully. "There were moments," I admitted, "especially after particularly hurtful incidents, when I wondered if the relationship was worth the pain it caused." She nodded, accepting this difficult truth. "What stopped you?" "Love," I said simply. "Not just for the twins, though they were a significant factor, but for Andrew too, and even for you, Natalie. Love isn't always about joy or ease. Sometimes, it's about perseverance, about holding space for the possibility of change. Even when there was no evidence we deserved that chance." "Worthiness isn't the point of love," I replied. "If we only loved people when they deserved it, we'd all be very lonely indeed." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking a lot about my own parents, how I've held them at arm's length for years because they didn't meet my expectations. I've been so quick to judge them, to find them lacking, when maybe—" She paused, her eyes fixed on the falling snow. "Maybe I never really gave them the chance to be more than the narrow role I assigned them." It's never too late to create a different kind of relationship, I told her gently. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you today, she said, turning back to me with resolve in her expression. I've invited my parents to join us for Christmas. I hope that's okay, since you're hosting now. Of course it's okay, I assured her. The more the merrier. They can be difficult, she warned. My mother is very opinionated and my father tends to dominate conversations. I smiled. Natalie, I raised Andrew through his teenage years. I think I can handle strong personalities at the dinner table. She laughed, the tension in her shoulders visibly easing. Fair point. But there's something else I wanted to ask you. Would you be willing to talk with my mother? Share how we've managed to rebuild our relationship? She and I have struggled for so long, and I'm not sure I know how to start fixing things. The request touched me deeply, not just because she valued our repaired relationship enough to want to replicate it, but because she trusted me to help facilitate healing in another family dynamic. I'd be honored, I told her. Though every relationship has its own unique challenges. I know, she acknowledged, but you have a way of seeing to the heart of things, of cutting through the noise to what really matters. I think she could learn from that. I know I have. As Christmas Eve approached, my home hummed with preparations. The twins came over after school to help me bake pies and set the dining room table. Andrew arrived early to handle the heavy lifting, moving furniture to accommodate the expanded guest list, bringing extra chairs down from the attic, setting up the old wooden card table that had served as the kids' table when he was small. Remember how I used to beg to sit at the grown-up table? He asked, running his hand over the table's scarred surface. You were so determined to be treated like an adult, I recalled. Even when you were 7 or 8. And now I sometimes wish I could go back to being a kid, he admitted with a rueful smile. Life seemed simpler then. It only seemed simpler because I was handling all the complicated parts, I pointed out. He laughed. True enough. You made it look easy, though. I never realized how much you were juggling. That's the job of parents, to create a stable foundation so children can focus on growing and learning, I said. The problems come when we never adjust that dynamic. When we keep treating adult children like they need protection from reality, or adult parents like they've ceased to evolve. Andrew nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about that a lot. Lately. How I froze you in time in my mind. Mom as I needed her to be when I was younger, not Mom as she actually is now. We all do it to some extent, I acknowledged. It's human nature to categorize and simplify. The challenge is recognizing when those simplifications no longer serve us, when they actually prevent us from authentic connection. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Natalie and the twins, laden with gifts and the special cranberry relish Natalie had insisted on contributing to the meal. Shortly after, the doorbell rang again, announcing the arrival of Natalie's parents, Martin and Judith Henderson. I greeted them warmly, taking their coats and welcoming them into my home. Martin was tall and distinguished, with silver hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to commanding attention. Judith was petite and elegantly dressed, her scrutinizing gaze taking in every detail of my modest living room. What a charming home, she said, in a tone that suggested she was somewhat surprised by this assessment. So traditional. Thank you, I replied, choosing to take the comment at face value. It served me well for over 30 years. Mom's house is awesome, Emma chimed in, appearing at my side. Wait until you see the sunroom. That's where we're going to plan our garden club project. Garden club? Judith inquired politely. Emma launched enthusiastically into an explanation of her community service project, while I escorted Martin to the living room where Andrew was pouring drinks. I observed with interest the dynamic between Natalie and her parents, the slight stiffness in her posture, the careful way she monitored her responses to her mother's comments, the subtle tension that vibrated beneath their polite exchanges. During dinner, served at my extended dining table now adorned with candles, holly, and my best holiday china, I watched the two families interact. The contrast was striking. Where Andrew and the twins now engaged with me naturally, drawing me into conversations and valuing my contributions, Natalie maintained a careful distance from her parents, particularly her mother. Judith, for her part, directed most of her comments to her grandchildren or to Andrew, rarely addressing Natalie directly. After dessert, as we moved to the living room for coffee, I found myself seated next to Judith on the sofa. She glanced around at the family photos on my walls and shelves, lingering on a recent one of me with the twins in the garden. "You seem to have a special bond with Emma and Ethan," she observed. "We've grown closer recently," I acknowledged. "It's been a gift to really get to know them as individuals." "Natalie tells me you've become quite the confidant to her as well," Judith continued, a question implicit in her statement. "We've been enjoying getting to know each other better," I said carefully, finding common ground beyond just being related through Andrew. Judith's perfectly manicured fingers tightened slightly around her coffee cup. "I've never quite managed that with Natalie. She's always been reserved with me, even as a child." I recognized the pain beneath her composed exterior, the longing of a mother for connection with her daughter, a longing I understood intimately. "It's never too late to build a different kind of relationship," I said, echoing the words I had offered to Natalie weeks earlier. "Isn't it?" Judith asked, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "Sometimes it feels like patterns become so entrenched that change is impossible." "Change is always possible," I assured her, "but it usually has to start with listening. Rather than directing, with genuine curiosity about who the other person has become." She studied me thoughtfully. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." "I am," I admitted. "My relationship with Andrew and his family has transformed completely in recent months, but only after I stopped expecting them to see me and started ensuring I was truly seeing them." Our conversation was interrupted by Emma, who approached with her tablet to show me the latest revision of her garden club proposal. But later in the evening, as the gathering began to wind down, Judith sought me out again. "Natalie mentioned you might be willing to have lunch sometime," she said, a hint of vulnerability beneath her poised exterior. "Just the two of us. I'd like to hear more about your perspective on family relationships." "I'd enjoy that," I told her sincerely. "How about after the holidays? Perhaps mid-January?" She nodded, looking relieved. "I'll call you to arrange it." As the evening drew to a close and coats were collected, presents arranged for transport, and goodbyes exchanged, I found myself standing on the porch watching the two families depart, Andrew, Natalie, and the twins in one car, Martin and Judith in another. The snow had stopped, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white that reflected the moonlight. My breath formed small clouds in the cold air as I waved one last time before turning back to the warmth of my home. Inside, the evidence of our gathering was everywhere. Empty coffee cups on side tables, dessert plates with lingering crumbs, discarded wrapping paper from the few gifts we had opened that evening, saving the rest for Christmas morning. But, rather than feeling overwhelmed by the cleanup ahead, I felt deeply content. My home had once again become what I had always intended it to be: a gathering place for family, a space where connections could be nurtured and memories created. As I moved through the rooms, straightening cushions and collecting dishes, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past months. From the painful moment when Andrew had declared I had nothing left to give to this evening of warmth and genuine connection, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. And yet, it wasn't a miracle at all, but the result of persistent effort on all our parts. My willingness to stand firmly in my truth, their openness to seeing me anew, our collective commitment to building something better than what we had before. The following week brought a surprise that would add yet another dimension to our evolving family dynamic. Andrew called on a Wednesday afternoon, his voice carrying an unusual tension. "Mom, I need your advice on something important," he began. "It's about work, but it's also about values, I guess." "I'm listening," I assured him. "I've been offered a significant promotion," he explained. "More money, more prestige, a corner office, everything I've been working toward for years." "That's wonderful news," I said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Isn't it?" "It would mean taking over the client portfolio of a senior partner who's retiring," Andrew continued. "The thing is, I've discovered some irregularities in how he's been handling certain accounts. Nothing technically illegal, but definitely in ethical gray areas, advising clients to make investments that generate higher commissions, but aren't necessarily in their best interests, that sort of thing." I see," I said, understanding his dilemma immediately. "And you'd be expected to continue these practices?" "Not explicitly," Andrew clarified. "But there's an unspoken expectation. This portfolio is highly profitable for the firm, and the clients are used to a certain approach. Rocking the boat could cost us their business." "What does Natalie think?" I asked. "She says I should take the promotion and then gradually implement changes once I've established myself in the new role," he replied. "And that makes sense from a strategic perspective, but something about it doesn't sit right with me." I considered his situation carefully before responding. "What would your father advise, do you think?" The question seemed to catch Andrew off guard. "Dad? I'm not sure. He was so ethical in his own work, but he also understood the realities of business." "Yes, he did," I agreed. "But he never compromised his principles for profit or advancement. Remember how he turned down the regional manager position because it would have meant implementing policies he considered harmful to the community?" "I'd forgotten about that," Andrew admitted. "I was pretty young when that happened." "You were 12, I confirmed. "But he sat you down and explained his decision, remember? He said that no amount of money was worth losing your self-respect." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. Then Andrew said quietly, "I do remember now. He said integrity isn't about the big dramatic stands, but about the small daily choices." "Exactly," I said, feeling a rush of warmth at the memory of Robert's wisdom. "Your father believed that true success wasn't measured by titles or income, but by the positive impact you have on others' lives." "That's what I've been missing," Andrew said, his voice stronger now. "All these years chasing traditional success, I lost sight of what Dad tried to teach me. What you both tried to teach me." "It's never too late to recalibrate your compass," I told him. "What would you do, Mom, if you were in my position?" I appreciated that he was asking for my perspective rather than simply seeking validation for a decision already made. "I would consider whether there might be a third option beyond either accepting the status quo or declining the promotion. Perhaps you could accept the position but be transparent about your intention to review and potentially revise client strategies to better align with their long-term interests." "That's actually brilliant," Andrew said, sounding genuinely impressed. "It positions the changes as a benefit to clients rather than a criticism of past practices. I could present it as enhancing value rather than correcting problems." "Exactly," I agreed. "Sometimes the wisest path forward acknowledges both ethical imperatives and practical realities." "Thank you, Mom," Andrew said warmly, "for seeing the whole picture and not just telling me what I want to hear." After we hung up, I sat in my favorite armchair by the window, watching the winter birds at my feeder, chickadees and cardinals, nuthatches, and the occasional downy woodpecker. Their presence reminded me of Robert, who had lovingly maintained those feeders for decades before his passing. How pleased he would be to know that his values continued to influence our son, that the ethical foundation we had tried to instill was still intact beneath years of corporate ambition. The new year arrived with a crystalline clarity that matched my own inner state. For the first time in many years, I didn't approach January with a sense of quiet dread. The post-holiday letdown, the return to isolation, the long stretch of winter ahead. Instead, I felt energized by possibilities. Emma's Garden Club proposal had been approved for funding through my foundation, with implementation scheduled for spring. Natalie and I had planned several outings, including a weekend trip to a winter art festival in a neighboring state. Andrew had accepted the promotion, but on his own terms, already working to reshape client relationships with a more ethical approach. Most surprisingly, my lunch with Judith Henderson had evolved into a regular monthly meeting. Our initial awkwardness had given way to genuine connection as we discovered shared experiences as mothers navigating complex relationships with adult children. Though very different in personality and background, we found common ground in our desire to be seen as whole people rather than merely defined by our familial roles. I've spent decades building a life around Natalie's expectations, Judith confided during our second lunch. Always available when needed, never intrusive, interested but not too interested in her affairs. It's exhausting, and it still never seems to be quite right. It's a delicate balance, I acknowledged, being supportive without overstepping, remaining connected without clinging. You seem to have mastered it, she observed. Natalie talks about you with such respect now. That's a recent development, I admitted, sharing some of the history of my relationship with Andrew and Natalie. It took a significant shock to their perception of me before they could see beyond their assumptions. The revelation about your financial acumen, Judith nodded. Natalie mentioned it, though I suspect there was more to the transformation than just that. The money was simply the catalyst, I agreed. What really changed was my willingness to stand firmly in my truth rather than contorting myself to fit their expectations. And their willingness, eventually, to see me as I am rather than as they assumed me to be. Judith considered this. I've never been very good at standing in my truth, as you put it. I've always been too concerned with maintaining harmony, even at the expense of my own authenticity. It's never too late to start, I encouraged her. Begin with small moments of genuine self-expression and build from there. She smiled ruefully. At our age, is there really time for such gradual approaches? At our age, I countered, we have the wisdom to recognize what truly matters and the freedom to pursue it without the distractions and insecurities of youth. I'd say that's an advantage, not a limitation. In February, an unexpected opportunity arose that would test my newfound philosophy in ways I couldn't have anticipated. My investment advisor, Michael, called with an intriguing proposition. Eleanor, I've been approached by a women's leadership organization that's putting together a panel on financial empowerment for their spring conference, he explained. They're looking for someone who can speak to long-term investment strategies for women, particularly those in or approaching retirement. I immediately thought of you. Me? I was genuinely surprised. I'm hardly an expert, Michael. I've just been fortunate in my investments. Your modesty is charming but misplaced, he countered. You've consistently outperformed market averages for years, made astute decisions during several downturns, and built a remarkable portfolio starting from a modest base. Plus, you've done it as a woman in a field still dominated by men. Your perspective would be invaluable to their audience. I hesitated, unaccustomed to thinking of myself as someone with expertise to share in a public forum. I don't have any experience with public speaking, Michael. I was a primary school teacher, not a financial advisor. All the better, he insisted. You can translate complex concepts into accessible language. And your story is compelling. It challenges stereotypes about older women and financial literacy. After our call, I sat in my sunroom considering the invitation. The idea both terrified and intrigued me. I had never thought of my financial journey as particularly noteworthy or instructive to others. It had been a private pursuit, developed out of necessity, and nurtured through careful study and disciplined practice. The thought of standing before an audience, presenting myself as someone with wisdom to impart, seemed presumptuous. And yet, wasn't this precisely the kind of opportunity I had been denied by others' limited perception of me? The chance to be recognized for my capabilities rather than dismissed for my age or gender? To contribute meaningfully based on my knowledge and experience rather than relegated to the sidelines? That evening, I called Andrew to seek his perspective. "You absolutely should do it," he said without hesitation after I explained the invitation. "Mom, you have so much to offer. Your approach to investing is unique, patient, values-driven, focused on genuine wealth building rather than quick returns. That's a perspective more people need to hear. But I've never done anything like this," I protested. "I wouldn't know where to begin." "I could help you prepare," he offered immediately. "Structure your talk, create visuals if you need them, practice handling questions. And Emma would be thrilled. She's been telling everyone about her financially. Savvy grandmother since your investing lessons." His enthusiasm bolstered my confidence. "You really think I could do this?" "I know you could," he said firmly. "The question is, do you want to?" I considered the question seriously. Did I want to step into such a public role? To claim expertise in an area I had always pursued privately? Did I want to risk potential criticism or dismissal from those who might question my credentials? Did I want to challenge myself in this new way at 70 years of age? "Yes," I decided aloud. "I think I do want to try this." "That's my mom," Andrew said, pride evident in his voice. Still growing, still embracing new challenges. As winter began its gradual surrender to spring, I worked steadily on my presentation with Andrew's assistance and encouragement. We met weekly in my dining room, spreading notes and charts across the table, refining key points, anticipating questions. The process itself became an unexpected gift. Hours spent in collaborative creativity with my son, our roles fluid and complementary, each bringing different strengths to the task. One evening, as we were wrapping up a particularly productive session, Andrew paused in gathering his materials. "You know, Mom, I keep thinking about what I said to you that day, about having nothing left to give." His expression was thoughtful, almost solemn. "I couldn't have been more wrong. You had so much all along: wisdom, perspective, financial, acumen, gardening knowledge, cooking skills, storytelling abilities. All these gifts that we were too blind or too busy to recognize. Perhaps I wasn't offering them in ways you could receive," I suggested gently. "Or perhaps we weren't looking," he countered. "Either way, I'm grateful that's changed. Working with you on this presentation, seeing you embrace this new challenge, it's inspiring. You're redefining what this stage of life can be, not just for yourself, but for all of us watching." His words touched me deeply, not because I needed his validation, but because they reflected genuine seeing, the recognition I had longed for through those years of dismissal and invisibility. "Thank you, Andrew," I said simply, "for seeing me now." As I stood on my porch that evening after he left, watching the first tentative crocuses pushing through the soil at the edge of my garden, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the painful moment when my son had declared me essentially worthless to this present reality, where my knowledge and capabilities were not just acknowledged but celebrated, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. And yet, it wasn't a miracle at all, but the result of two powerful forces: my unwavering belief in my own worth and the universe's mysterious way of revealing truth when the time is right. The accidental delivery of that bank statement had been the catalyst, but the true change had come from within. My decision to stand firmly in my dignity, to no longer accept being diminished, to claim the full measure of my capabilities and contributions. In the gathering twilight, with spring's promise evident in the softening air and the subtle greening of the world around me, I made a silent vow to continue growing, learning, and evolving for all the days granted to me, to share whatever wisdom I had gathered along the way, and to remain open to the endless possibilities for connection and contribution that life continues to offer, no matter our age or circumstance. For the truth I had discovered was both simple and profound. We always have something to give, if only we believe in our own value and find the courage to offer our gifts authentically. And in that giving, we not only enrich others, but continue to expand and deepen our own experience of what it means to be fully, gloriously human. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.